What's up, Miami Dolphins fans? We have a lot of news to talk about. In case you missed it, Troy Aikman was hired by the Miami Dolphins. We'll talk about that on today's show. But we also have another quarterback added to the roster, Cam Miller, former sixth-round pick out of North Dakota State. We'll get into him a little bit on today's show as well. But make sure you do subscribe if you haven't already for daily Dolphins content. We cover you on all Miami Dolphins news and rumors. We are 35 subscribers away from 79,000. Let's get there on today's show. Let's get there before Week 18. All right, we're going to start with the interview and the hiring of Troy Aikman and what it means for the GM search, as well as the future of Mike McDaniel in Miami. Originally, the report was coming in from Tom Pelissero, Adam Schefter, Ian Rappaport, whoever you want to give credit to, but they said in their initial kind of report that Miami really wanted outside perspective from someone who had strong relationships across the league like Troy Aikman does. Obviously was one of the best quarterbacks in the history of the NFL. He's been one of the best broadcasters in the NFL over the last decade too. So he's built strong relationships with people across the league, whether it is people in the front office, whether it is coaches, whether it is former players. Like, he'll have a good understanding of who is well respected across the league, and I think his insight will become very valuable for the Miami Dolphins. I really like this hire, and I'll explain more here in just a second. But for the people wondering if he's going to be with the Dolphins full time, no, this is a short-term hire. He is expected to sit in on interviews, aid the Dolphins through the interviewing process. He won't be the only one either. Dan Marino will be in this GM kind of search process. We will also see Brandon Shore, and we'll talk more about that here. But Barry Jackson specifically, and this is a report that I wanted to reference that he had yesterday on the matter, says Marino and Brandon Shore will be involved in the GM search. Their opinion is valued by ownership, but Dolphins ownership, not anybody else, will be leading the search with direct knowledge. Aikman is among those who will participate in interviews, as we were talking about earlier. So I know a lot of people were thinking about, well, what does this mean for the future of Mike McDaniel? What does this mean about the future of Brandon Shore? Well, Shore is an intriguing name here, and if you are unfamiliar who he is currently Senior Vice President of Football and Business Administration for Miami. He has held that role since 2021. This season, by the way, is the 16th year he has been with the Miami Dolphins organization, doing many different things, but he is almost like the money guy. He is the person who, if you follow the Heat, is like Andy Ellisberg, the guy who tries to make it work financially, advises the general manager about spending money in certain places. Now, a lot of people are like, well, does this mean he's going to be like pseudo GM and the other GM is only going to be making the decisions on what players to bring in and Shore is going to tell him how much money he can spend? I don't really think that's the case whatsoever. I believe Miami will go through this GM search and make a real thought and real hiring, allowing the new GM to come in and have their own pathway here and let them take control. Because if you don't, you're not going to end up with a good GM candidate. And before we continue, let me know, what was your one-word reaction to the Dolphins hiring Troy Aikman to help them go through this GM search? Let me know your thoughts down in the comment section. My one word, serious. I think Miami is really dedicated and going to go through this in an in-depth process to find the right guy. They know Chris Grier was not the dude. They gave him too much leeway, and I think they are really hoping to nail down this GM to where he will be here and turn this franchise around sooner rather than later and be here for a decade plus with actual playoff success. And as we get closer to the GM search starting next week, Tom Pelissero noted that the focus on their next GM search is on a strong scouting background, and interviews are expected to begin next week. And that's fascinating because I do think we're going to hit the ground running here in our GM search. Once this season goes final and we really start to get into the nuts and bolts of the offseason next week, I think Miami is going to start interviewing people right away and get really into it. And if you're asking me, based on that report and the hiring of Troy Aikman, where Miami can go with their GM candidates, I labeled 5 guys that I'm intrigued with, and I do think Miami will interview based off what I've heard and what I've read across various networks and what people have said to me is that I think John McKay, the assistant GM for the Rams, is an intriguing guy. Alec Halaby, a assistant GM for the Philadelphia Eagles. Josh Williams, who as a director of pro and college scouting for the San Francisco 49ers. John Eric Sullivan, who is a key piece in the Green Bay Packers organization, currently vice president of player personnel. And then I also think they're going to interview Champ Kelly. But I'll say this real quick. I don't think Champ Kelly stands a chance for the job. And this is not me discrediting him because he does have a 10-6 record as interim GM right now, although I think that's just pure coincidence. When you bring in outside people like Troy Aikman to kind of help you with this GM search, and tells me that they're going to cast a very wide net and see what comes in. Like, I don't think you bring in Troy Aikman to go through this entire process, get his thoughts, and then, excuse me, ultimately come back and say, yeah, we're just going to promote Champ Kelly. That seems incredibly unlikely to me. And for the people talking about Mike McDaniel, before we get into the GM talk a little bit more, I don't think this impacts anything. Whoever you hire as GM is going to make that decision on what they want to do with Mike McDaniel in 2026 and going forward. We'll ultimately see where that goes and see how the final week plays out. But Troy Aikman, even though he's been critical of Mike McDaniel and really positive about Mike McDaniel in terms of his play calling, but then questioned him a lot on Monday Night Football, I don't think has any impact on his future in Miami. We're going to get into the GM candidate talk here in just a second, but this episode is brought to you by PrizePicks. Whether you're starting a new routine or making player picks for the first time, we know trying something new can be hard, but in life and on PrizePicks, it always feels good to be right. And with high pressure playoff matchups beginning every weekend and elite hoops every single night, it never stops, and PrizePicks lets you take control. And yes, your fantasy league is over, but with PrizePicks, you do not have to wait until next year's draft to keep playing fantasy. PrizePicks lets you play fantasy football every week, even in the playoffs. Just pick your favorite players and win when they hit their projections every week. No draft required. I've got a 3-player entry already locked in this week. I really like more than on Quinn Ewers passing yards. I really like more than on Isaac Tesla touchdowns. I think he gets into the end zone in that Bears-Lions game. I also like Rico Dowdle to score a touchdown on Saturday in that Panthers-Buccaneers NFC South clash. That's a couple players that I really like this week. You can join me. Download the PrizePicks app today and use code CLNS to get $50 in lineups after you play your first $5 lineup. That's code CLNS to get $50 in lineups after you play your first $5 lineup. PrizePicks. It's good to be right. As we get into some of the GM candidates here, you really think about if Miami is going with the strong scouting background. I like Alec Halaby. He's a young, rising guy, went to Harvard, assistant GM for the Eagles. He doesn't really have a scouting background. So if they're looking for someone who has been on the road, knows how to evaluate talent in the draft, I am not sure Alec Halaby will be their guy. But names like John McKay, John Eric Sullivan, Josh Williams absolutely are. John McKay is a young guy up and coming in that Rams organization. This is his first year as assistant general manager. But how about this, folks? He spent the previous 4 seasons as the director of pro personnel and has also served as the assistant director of pro scouting within his 10 years inside the Los Angeles Rams organization. We just saw the Jaguars hire a young up-and-coming guy from the Rams front office in Gladstone, and now the Jaguars are about to win the AFC South, have double-digit wins, are in the playoffs. I think this guy, John McKay, is certainly a name that you have to monitor. He's one of my top guys that I'm looking after, and based off what I've heard and based off what we've seen reported, I think McKay fits all of the potential check marks the Miami Dolphins are looking for. But you talk about Josh Williams. He is in his 14th season with the 49ers. He has been the director scouting of football operations. He served 2 seasons, 2022 and 2023, as a national scout after 5 years, 2017 to 2021, as an area scout. He also, in 2016, was the 49ers National Football Scouting Representative. So in his current role, since 2024, Williams directs pro and college scouting efforts, supports player development, and assists in contract negotiations. Does that not sound like all of the check marks Miami was looking to kind of cross off here? Scouting background, he's done it for 10 years plus. He is inside a really well-run organization in San Francisco that is consistently a contender in the NFC. Josh Williams, another name that I really like. Him and John McKay are 2 guys I would keep an eye on. But you also can't rule out John Eric Sullivan, who is currently the Vice President of Player Personnel for the Green Bay Packers. Let's go through his background inside the Green Bay organization, somewhere he's been since 2003. Started as a training camp intern, then becomes a football operations department employee. Then in 2008, becomes Central Plains Region Scout. And then in 2015, Southeast Region Scout. In 2016, he served as the Director of College Scouting for a couple of years. Then in 2018, gets promoted to Co-Director of Player Personnel until 2021, where then he now holds his current position of Vice President of Player Personnel. Similar to Josh Williams, a massive and grand scale background in scouting all over the country, leading the player of personnel kind of discussion for an organization in Green Bay that, you guessed it, is historically always good, always building the right way, and always competing. Josh Williams, John Eric Sullivan, John McKay. Those are my top 3. They fit the mold of what we've heard they're looking for, and I do believe Miami will like what they see when they sit them down for an interview, and I almost guarantee the Dolphins will be interviewing those 3. If I'm wrong, I'm wrong, but I'm willing to bet that ultimately happens. That will do it for our GM talk, but let's get into Cam Miller now, the quarterback that we alluded to Miami signed earlier in the video. Former 6th-round pick out of North Dakota State, set records there. I mean, just listen to these stats over his 5-year career. Was there from 2020 to 2024, completed 69.3% of his passes, threw for 9,720 yards, 81 touchdowns to 19 interceptions. Just a real accurate downfield thrower at that FCS level, but he's also got a nice ability to run. Through his 5 years, 2,277 rushing yards for 48 touchdowns and 4.3 yards per carry. And I think that's always impressive because college football does the one thing I hate the most, and that is counting sacks as rushing yards. It's absolutely ridiculous. So to put up those consistent rushing numbers and average 4.3 yards per carry with sacks being included tells me a lot about his ability to run the football as well as throw the ball. And Raiders quarterback coach Greg Olsen was very disappointed to hear they lost Miller on their practice squad. He said specifically, disappointing to lose him because we put a lot of time in, and he's a guy who put a lot of time in. He's a hard worker and certainly somebody that we valued here. Hard to lose a guy like that late in the season. And you might ask, well, why did Miami Dolphins even sign him to their active roster? Well, we know that Tua is likely going to be gone, and as we get 1 week away from the offseason, if you want to sign a player to a futures contract to bring them into mini camp, OTAs, and training camp in June, July, August, you can sign these guys who aren't on standard deals to futures contracts to have priority for them in your offseason program. So to me, I think Miami, Mike McDaniel or Sham Kelly, whoever you want to kind of lay it out, saw him as an option and wanted to bring him in earlier rather than later. And Miami's obviously not going to have 4 quarterbacks active. They have 4 QBs on the 53-man roster, and Ewers, Miller, Tua, and Zach Wilson. I would assume 2 of them are inactive. One of them would be the emergency third quarterback. I don't expect all 3 to be active, but hey, you never know. Another reason why to get excited about Cam Miller a little bit here, Tom Brady, the GOAT of football, praised him a ton. We know he has some ownership stake within the Las Vegas Raiders. Apparently, that around draft time, Brady to the front office praised his throwing technique and potential, and it helped lead the Raiders to draft Miller in the 6th round as a developmental player. So if Brady is endorsing him, Brady likes what he saw at North Dakota State, then heck yeah, I'm willing to bring him in here on a futures contract to see what he can do. Not going to act like he's going to ultimately be the future quarterback for the Miami Dolphins or anything serious, but there is a chance that he could ultimately develop into being a backup quarterback for Miami. I don't think you can say that. In his first preseason action this August for the Raiders, I mean, he wasn't that good. Completed 20 of 37 passes, which is about 54.1% for 203 yards, 1 touchdown, and 1 interception across 3 games. Did have a pretty nice preseason debut against the Seattle Seahawks. I believe he was like 7 of 8 for 70 yards, and then the other 2 games weren't as clean, but Miller's certainly an intriguing player that I hope sticks around and ultimately is signed to a futures contract because, hey, you never know. He was drafted ahead of Quinn Ewers. Now, Quinn Ewers obviously is a better quarterback, but who knows what Cam Miller can be? I guess only time will tell. That'll do it for today's show. Appreciate everybody for watching. Like I said, hit that sub button. We're 35 away from getting to 79K, Let's get there. Also follow me on Twitter because all of these moves and signings that Miami made yesterday, including the Troy Aikman hire, I broke the news first over there on Twitter, @Nick_Roloff. Go give me a follow.